Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. In this week's episode, I take you inside the video strategy at the New York Times. Peruse through the vast video archive at the New York Times, and you'll come across plenty of your standard short documentary films, the kinds of voiceover, B-roll footage, and original interviews. But you'll also encounter some experimental fare. There's the fake infomercial advertising a phone hotline for racists. There's an entire animated series geared toward parents. And then there's the ongoing series called Diary of a Song, which uses a mixture of low-quality Skype footage and animation to walk the viewer through how a hit song was made. Overseeing much of this production is Nancy Gauss, Executive Director of Video at the New York Times. I recently interviewed Gauss about her team's approach to video creation and how it fits in with the Times' larger goals in driving brand loyalty and paid subscriptions. Let's jump right into it. Hey, Nancy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you're the executive director for video at the New York Times. What does that job entail?
That's right. That job entails essentially thinking about our video offering holistically in terms of the editorial decisions that we're making day to day, as well as the strategy that we're pursuing and how we are essentially maximizing the impact that we have with the resources that we have when considering creating content across the entire New York Times portfolio.
Well, speaking of research sources, can you give me a sense of how large the video staff is at the New York Times?
Yeah, that's honestly a hard question to answer because we have a number of people who are full-time in video, but it's hard to put an exact number on the people working on video because we collaborate with reporters around the building and around the world. We hire freelancers to tap into skill sets ranging from 3D modeling to cinematography to research and reporting. So, there are a number of people full-time on video, but we're also working collaboratively with reporters in and outside of the building.
I was looking at your LinkedIn, and it looks like you started at the New York Times before hopping over. You went over to CNN for a year as a producer. And I was wondering if you could tell us what would you say is the main difference between the approach of a cable news channel and what you and your colleagues are doing with digital video? For instance, with cable news, there's a lot of talking heads, people in front of the camera kind of discussing, opinionating or reporting, but that kind of video doesn't seem to do as well, online. What did you notice between those kind of two different ecosystems?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When I went to CNN, I was managing a small team of what they called an enterprise digital team. And the idea is that it was an area where we could do a lot of experimentation, both in terms of storytelling techniques, but also gear and technology. But everything that team did went on TV somewhere. So it could be a 90-second segment on Don Lemon's show, or we did several hour-long documentaries for CNN International. And, I would say at that point, I had worked at the New York Times and the Washington Post previously, focusing exclusively on digital. And the thing that I realized is that the foundation of the reporting is very similar in both realms, but the expression of that reporting is pretty different. So we were really tasked with thinking about what are some of the innovative original stories that we can do with a focus on digital, but that also go on TV. So I was looking at it through a slightly different lens than straight digital to straight TV. But it was a really interesting experience because I think it showed that there is a lot of room, a lot of the honestly challenging work is doing original reporting and coming up with unique ideas to either pursue or different ways to frame it. And then thinking about how you tell those stories on different platforms is really pretty fun and didn't require a total overhaul of the idea, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I kind of get the sense that cable news does the talking head thing because they have so many hours to fill. And so you can't create highly produced video like what you guys are doing at the Times and what you were doing for those individual segments to fill 24 hours of airtime, so that they are kind of forced to compromise in that regard.
It's just such a different platform, thinking about a 24-hour cable news network versus trying to build an audience in a digital space. It's hard to compare. They're just so different.
I know the video team at the New York Times, you're creating both kind of more straight documentary news video, but you're also producing video for the opinion side. Are those separate teams that are, or do you have a lot of cross collaboration?
I would say from a strategic point of view, there's a lot of collaboration and thinking about, as an organization, how are we spending our resources on video? Where are we placing our bets? How are we pursuing, different editorial channels, so to speak? But on a day-to-day level, opinion is very separate from the newsroom. We don't collaborate in terms of, story ideas or execution, but we are trying to work collaboratively to think about the types of video we're creating, the strategy that we're pursuing, and how, the newsroom, which spans news, investigations, features, and then opinion as well, are all working together to engage our audience, reach new audiences, and deliver high quality journalism.
So would like a producer on the opinion side not work on the straight news side, or like are those like people kind of kept separate, or like what's the separation?
Yeah, the separation is really the editorial ideation and execution. So anyone who is coming up with stories and executing them, those teams are separate. But, from a strategic level, thinking about like where we're going and how we're spending our resources, there is collaboration across both sides. And then in terms of more administrative stuff, like sharing gear, we have a shared studio, that kind of stuff, there's a little bit more overlap.
Can you talk a little bit about like the longer term, more ambitious projects you've worked on, like in terms of like what the process is for coming out with those kinds of things? For instance, one thing that you guys got a lot of attention for was this animated parenting video series that your team created. What's kind of like the process of approaching these more kind of longer term projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Conception was a series that was pitched by one of our really talented producers, Margaret Cheatham Williams. And she developed the concept in 2016 and pitched it at a time when we were hyper focused on limited run series, aligning with the features desks in the newsroom, and, thinking about ways that we could reach new, and in this case, a new younger female audience. And so she came up with this idea and pitched it. She was working within the series team. And we did several call outs where we received more than 1,500 responses, which was pretty remarkable. So it showed us that there was a lot of demand for this kind of content, and the readers.
What is a call out? What do you mean by that? Sorry.
Essentially, a call out is calling out to our audience, hey, we're doing this project. If you have ideas, if you have a story to share, let us know. And there's various channels for them to respond and give us a sense of what they would say. And then she went through all of those responses and sort of looked for people who she thought could draw out interesting stories, and interviewed a bunch of them over the phone, and ended up going to, in a more traditional way, interview the characters in each of those 6 profiles in person. So she traveled to their hometown and did the audio interviews in person, and then worked with a series of all-female animators, a different animator for each episode, to bring those stories to life.
And what's the rollout of that look like? Like I looked at it when it was on the New York Times website, but was that published across platforms? Were you publishing them all at once? Like how do you kind of generate, interest in such a series?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, we've experimented with, do we publish things like this once a week for 6 weeks, or do we put them all up at once and then promote them over time? And in this case, we did the latter, on site and on YouTube. And then, we also think about how these stories live on other platforms. But we did see that over 50,000 users spent 25 minutes or more on platform per session, which is a remarkable level of engagement. So we were really proud of that. And I think one of the things that we've really been focusing on is serialized content, and looking for ways that, when we draw people in and they find a body of work that is consistent, we are seeing a lot of the binge watching behavior. And so now we're thinking strategically about creating content in a way and, sharing it with our audience so that they can find it in that way and consume a number of episodes per visit.
And, that's interesting because obviously there's all this debate over the Netflix strategy. They really kind of pioneered that in terms of, releasing episodes all at once. Do you kind of look at that kind of, what Netflix is doing to inform how you guys are approaching series, especially when you're thinking about binge watching?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we're looking at what all of our competitors are doing. And as platforms sort of merge and break down, we do look at Netflix, even though I think that in some ways the content is pretty different. We spend a lot of time looking at analytics on YouTube and experimenting with different formats and analyzing the data to see what works in such a video rich environment and on a platform that has such rich analytics tools. I think we learn a lot, honestly, from experimenting on YouTube and analyzing all of the decisions that we're making and seeing what works. But I mean, of course, we're looking at what Netflix and a number of other competitors are doing and considering the moves that they're making as we're evolving over time. But I would say that, we're spending more time focusing on site and on YouTube.
A lot of your videos are kind of very straightforward documentary style, but like there are some that are kind of more outside the box and experimental. For instance, you do these like really cool anatomy of a song videos that are shot in this really unique way where you'll use even kind of like low quality Google Hangouts interview video, but like that has like lag and stuff, which you would think would make video worse, but it actually for some reason works really well with this style. Like, can you talk about that kind of experimentation and how, like, what you guys have done that is kind of a little bit more outside the box?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think with everything, we try to let, in some ways, the story dictate the form and really think about, what is the most interesting thing about how this song was made? What are the things that we can share with our audience that they wouldn't otherwise know? And one of the piece where we sort of shifted that format was the middle. And we, between the songwriter, the producers, everyone who creatively collaborated on that, one of the really interesting things about that process that we learned was that, the songwriters in Australia, the producers are in LA, and they'll create a song together through digital means, through their cell phones. She would sing, like, what if we did it like this? And then she'd send the producer a voice memo and they'd write back and they'd text to each other. And they shared all of those fragments with us so that we could sort of rebuild how the song went from, like, what if we started with this line or this chord, and how it built and evolved into what it became. And it was just a really interesting window into the creative process. And so we said, this is incredible that we are seeing how this unfolds, and we should find a way to share this with our audience in a way that's authentic to their process. And so we took that approach, and I think it really paid off and played to the strengths of the content that we had, and is something that we've since done a few other times. So, we're still experimenting with that series and evolving it, but that was something that we did as a way to sort of play to the strengths of the editorial framework that we had.
Were you kind of nervous about how it would come off, using kind of lower quality recording and video than, what you guys might typically do, where you actually send, a videographer directly to that person's house, so you have like perfect mic and everything like that? Like what was there any kind of conversations about whether that approach would work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wouldn't say that we were nervous. We were so excited by the raw assets that they had shared with us and what it revealed about the creative process that we really wanted to lean into that. And of course, we don't want to make stuff that looks, sort of like cheap or sloppy or anything like that. And so we definitely spend a lot of time on the first iteration of experiments like that in development and thinking about, what if we do this or what if we do that? And let's consider these different approaches. And we really sort of landed on, if we just talk to them in the way that they talk to each other, I think that plays to the strength of the story that we're telling. And we all thought that it worked. And, it's nice to hear that you did too.
You mentioned about how you guys are, it's hard to pinpoint how many people work on the video staff because you're constantly pulling people in. Can you talk a little bit about that collaboration with the print side, pulling in beat reporters who can either narrate or inform a video? How are you guys working with the traditional newspaper side of the Times in terms of story development?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think we've really evolved over time, and in similar ways to both the photo department and the graphics department. All three of those departments at one point started as more of a service desk, and over time have found the right sort of calibration for their team within the newsroom to be more of a partner. And that's where I think we've really found a lot of forward momentum. So, rather than looking to the print desk for ideas or for ways that we can do videos off of stories that they've already created, we're really trying to be more of a partner with them in developing things from the ground up that really play to the strengths of video. Good example is when we were covering Jamal Khashoggi's murder. I think as that story started to unfold, there's information that's hidden in all corners of the open web. And if you dig deep enough and know how to find it, you can paint a picture that can confirm or deny something that's alleged. And we have an open source team that is relatively new that has the skill set to know how to find that stuff. So in this case, our efforts really began when Turkey dropped the names of the 15 guys and the grainy photos. I don't know if you remember this, but at that moment, we set up a Google Doc that said, okay, who are these people and how close are they to the crown prince? And then people from literally all corners of the newsroom and people, our correspondents around the world, all started working to see, what can we learn? How can we confirm what's being said? And who are these people? A lot of them were members of the intelligence community, military leaders, government officials. So their presence online was minimal. Most of the content was in Arabic, so it was incredibly challenging to find. But we had a team, like I said, of reporters and video and across the newsroom tackling this from every angle. And we were using the open source techniques along with more traditional reporting techniques. And the team gathered, we were able to put together a series of dots that we slowly could connect and painted a clearer picture that showed that this wasn't a random coincidence. It was a highly organized and planned hit job that was brazenly executed. And I think that's a really good example of the ways that we collaborate. It's like everyone, especially on stories like that, sort of come together and you use a variety of skill sets to try to uncover the truth. I would also say another good example of this is interneting with Amanda Hess. That was something where we were thinking about, we were brainstorming with the culture desk and saying, what if we were to think about these video ideas from the ground up? Where do we think there is something interesting? And Amanda and Alicia DeSantis were partnering with us to develop that series just for video. And I think that's where we've really figured out how to work differently, where we're no longer looking at print budgets and saying that would make a great video. Let's make a video to go with that story, because there's two challenges with that. One is that those ideas are often conceived for print, which doesn't always play to the strengths of video, but it also creates a pretty redundant experience for our audience. And so, we don't, and also the production methods are so different that oftentimes either the video or the article are finished before the other, and then trying to roll them out, it's just not a fluid process. So we've really taken a step back and thought about how can we tap into the expertise around the newsroom? How can we leverage some of the creative ideas from people who are maybe not traditional video makers and work together to realize some of these ideas? And I think that's another good example where it's really about working together, from the brainstorm phase at the ground level up to we've now done 2 full seasons of that show.
And is it like it's a regular series that Amanda is narrating?
Yeah. Have you seen it?
I haven't, no.
It is. We've done 2 seasons of it so far, each with 10 episodes. And they're all about, it's in line with the way that she reports, but it's Amanda decoding the culture of the internet, essentially. And if you liked the format of Diary of a Song, I think you'll like the format of Amanda Hess. It's really voicey and creative and sort of out there in terms of what you would expect from the New York Times. And, that's something that we've been thinking about with our features desk, is really bringing voice into those things. So I would say if you look at both Conception and interneting, they were sort of born in a similar phase of things, where Conception was us thinking about the same strategy and framework, but through the lens of really intimate stories, trying to be creative and innovative and think outside of the box. And Amanda's the same, but it's hosted. And so we were looking at these different models and thinking about, bringing more voice and creativity and innovation in video into our work. And I think those are both really good examples of where the team did just that.
Well, the Daily, which is the daily podcast that the New York Times creates, has been getting a lot of attention, and that's built around the personality of one person, Michael Barbaro. And I've noticed that places like Vox, they're also building video series around personalities. And then like BuzzFeed briefly had a Netflix show that was kind of built around the reporters in the newsroom. I've seen Complex do that kind of too. I hadn't seen the Amanda Hess videos. It seemed to me, but though looking through a lot of the Times videos, that they seem to be less personality driven. Do I have the wrong conception of that, or is that a conscious decision that you guys don't want to be too personality driven? How do you guys approach that?
Yeah, I would say a small number of things that we're doing are hosted, and it's something that we're actively experimenting with and considering. I think when you look at the breadth of coverage that we have and our focus on creating original, sort of high impact journalism, that doesn't always play well with a host necessarily. We're thinking about like our visual investigations work, our news coverage. And again, there are areas where we're experimenting with it, but it's not our core focus. We've done interneting with Amanda Hess, which I think was really great. And she's a really good host for bringing a series like that to life. We've done a few videos with Max Fisher and Amanda Taub on The Interpreter, which have also been really great. So, we're actively experimenting with it, but it's not the core focus of our portfolio right now.
How do you think about different native video platforms like Facebook Watch, Twitter, YouTube? Are you creating different kinds of video for each platform?
Our strategy is really rooted in creating high quality journalism that's in line with the rest of the report. We're primarily focused on platform and on YouTube. However, we do post our content on other platforms. And while we are thinking and focusing on those platforms, we want our work to find the largest possible audience. So we think deeply about strategies off platform, where to place our bet in terms of resources, and how we measure success. On YouTube, we think that we're reaching new audiences. There's an additional revenue stream that comes with it. And we learn a ton about how the YouTube audience responds to our video. And we bring those learnings back to site and apply some of them to our product and create new enhancements that, engage and build out our video product. Facebook and Twitter, we primarily see as platforms where we can drive our audience back to site. So we've made a strategic decision to approach them in that way. So when we're thinking about creating video around the editorial offering that we have on those platforms, it's really with an eye towards driving people back to site.
So then how does video tie into the Times subscription strategy? Like, are those videos behind the paywall? Have you gotten any sense of like how important video is to the subscription strategy?
That's a really good question, and it's something that we talk about a lot. We don't have a really granular understanding of that, but I think, when we're thinking about a premium subscription product that's worth paying for, that's differentiated in the competitive landscape, visual journalism is a key priority for the Times, but also innovation is. And, we do a lot. Our team does a lot of work with immersive journalism and working with the graphics team to do interactives and different innovative formats that are not necessarily video. And, so when we think about video's role in the subscription business, it really is about creating a differentiated, unique product that's worth paying for. And I think whether or not video goes behind the paywall is an ongoing discussion.
What are you guys doing on the live video front?
In terms of live, we're doing a lot of coverage of really important high profile news events. The Cohen hearing, Kavanaugh, stories that we think that our audience is going to be looking for either while they're at work or while they're on the go. And they come to us hopefully not only to find that video, but to find the accompanying analysis that goes with it. So I don't know if you've watched any of these live events on our platform, but we have reporters commenting on these events as they unfold to give our audience, either a richer understanding or more historical context, just general analysis, so that there is a richer, again, differentiated experience on platform.
And like, is that something that needs to mature more? Because like, it seems like very few live videos have like a mass viewership. Do you think like online viewers still aren't primed as much for live video?
It's a good question. And I think some of the volatility on other platforms where, live is a huge focus and then it's not, can color that in a way that I actually think on platform, we do see really high engagement on some of these live events. And, I think when there is a pivotal moment or something that's, high priority conversation for people, we are seeing a large audience tune into it. So, I think that while there may seem to be various points of views about live, we are actually seeing pretty high engagement when it's the right editorial topic.
Okay, Nancy. Well, those were all the questions I had. Where can people find you online?
You can find me on LinkedIn under Nancy Gauss, or come to thenewyorktimes.com/video to look at our latest content.
Awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all we have for you today. Be sure to subscribe to The Business of Content on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. See you next week.